In 1961, George Carroll disappeared from his Long Island home, and according to his family, he was never to be seen again. It was a mystery that haunted Georgie's 4 children, who desperately hoped that one day they would get closure. But as the decades passed with no sign of the dad, that hope began to dwindle. Then, almost 60 years after George had vanished, his youngest son, Mike, made a shocking discovery in the basement of the Carroll family home. There was nothing in Georgie's past to suggest he ever become the focus of a decades-long mystery. After fighting in and surviving the Korean War, he had settled in Lake Grove, Long Island. There, he lived in a little house on a suburban road named Olive Street. It seemed like he pretty much had it made. George had grown his family too. With his wife, Dorothy, he had 4 children: Patricia, Jean, Stephen, and Mike. And the Carroll kids were all fairly small in 1961. The eldest, Patricia, was 9 years old, while the youngest, Mike, was less than a year old. In many ways, 1961 was a year to remember. President John F. Kennedy was inaugurated as the United States' 35th president in January. Just a few months later, in April, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human to travel into space. It was an era of prosperity in the U.S., but not everyone was having a good time. In 1961, George apparently disappeared from his family home, never to return again, and all that the man left in his wake was a trail of unanswered questions. Had he been having an affair and run off with another woman? Was he tired of his idyllic domestic life? Or was something more malevolent at play? After George went missing, Dorothy apparently told their children that their father had left the house to buy cigarettes one night and had never come home. Mysteriously, though, he had forgotten to take his wallet, and son Mike, who was just 8 months old at the time of his dad's alleged disappearance, never quite bought this explanation. But while they dogged their mom with questions, Mike and his siblings got little in the way of answers from Dorothy. In the meantime, rumors ran rife among the Carrolls. Some relatives reportedly believed that George had fled his family and traveled to Korea. Then a more sinister story apparently suggested that George was dead and buried beneath the family's basement. Even stranger, it was later alleged that no one had filed a missing person report in the wake of Georgie's departure. That meant no police forces had been looking for him. Then, not long after George had vanished, a man called Richard Darris moved into the Carroll family home. He became Dorothy's second husband, and the pair would welcome a baby boy together. Yet, this wasn't a happy ending for the mother of 5. As her marriage to Richard would eventually fall apart, Dorothy filed for divorce from Richard in 1983. She apparently suspected that he had been unfaithful to her, and at some point in the late 1970s, she had asked him to pack his bags. Another father figure was vanishing from the Carroll kids' lives, although this time they were at least able to stay in touch with him. After his divorce from Dorothy, Richard reportedly moved to Nuevo Laredo in Mexico. He also remarried. As the years passed, however, Dorothy apparently maintained her theory that George had abandoned the kids. So they stopped asking questions for a while. There really wasn't much talk about it. Her son Stephen told WAP in 2018. But we became curious as adults as to where he might be, and soon the hunt was on. Dorothy ultimately passed away in 1998. But Mike had purchased the Carroll family home on Olive Street before her death. He had lived there for almost 2 decades, in fact, before he began to consider those old family rumors. Could his father really could be buried below his house? There was only one way to find out. So Mike decided that he would search for some answers by excavating the basement. Shortly after the work began, however, he was forced to abandon his plans. "I was actually digging in the wrong spot," Mike told News 1-2. "I got to the point where it became dangerous because I was afraid my house was going to cave in. So I stopped digging." This time around, they employed a range of experts to help them locate any clues. Among the experts Mike enlisted was someone who worked with ground-penetrating radar. This uses electromagnetic radiation, which scans below ground to build a picture of what lies below. And when used in the Carroll's basement, the equipment detected a mysterious mass 6 feet under the concrete floor. Could it really be the missing dad? Or was this a red herring? Following advice from one of his sisters, Mike also turned to a psychic for help. And in late 2018, Mike told News 1 exactly how his sons had become involved in the mission. "I told my kids, guys, come on over here and help me out." Then, while Mike's sons were apparently digging in the spot that had been picked out by the psychic, they finally made a breakthrough. There, several feet under the ground, Christopher and Michael Jr. found something that they believed to be of interest, and they alerted their father, who came rushing down to the basement from upstairs. And upon closer inspection, Mike made a chilling realization. What he saw could very well be the remains of a human being. They informed the police. The Suffolk County Police Department couldn't immediately confirm the origin of the bones, although they did say that they looked human. But the cops would need to carry out DNA testing and potentially analyze dental records before they could say for certain who or what the bones belonged to. Could they have belonged to George? Even without such confirmation, Mike was convinced that the remains were those of his father. In December 2018, officials from Suffolk County announced that the skeleton was in fact Georgie's. 6 decades after Georgie's disappearance, it seems Mike and his siblings had finally found their father. While it's likely that the Carrolls will never know the full story behind their dad's death, an autopsy has provided some clarity. According to the medical report, George was murdered, and his remains show signs of blunt impact trauma on his skull. But while the injuries George reportedly sustained may have shocked some families, the news didn't come as a total surprise to Mike. Given the evidence that Mike and his sons uncovered, the family's hunt for their missing father has apparently morphed into a police homicide inquiry. After 6 decades, though the killer may very have passed away too. Meanwhile, the police had their own theories. They apparently would have liked to have interviewed Mike's former stepfather, Richard, but he has since passed away too. And perhaps because there'll be no questioning of Richard, Mike has kept an open mind on the matter. "I'm trying to avoid pointing a finger at this point," he told Newsday. And by looking at the discovery of his father's remains from this point of view, Mike has been able to celebrate the fact that his family finally has some closure. "I tell my sons, we hit a grand slam in the bottom of the ninth, 2 outs," he told the New York Post. "We found our dad, so we win." It was a sentiment shared by Mike's older brother Stephen, who had been 5 years of age when his dad had gone missing. "It just struck me that he has been here the whole time, and it's wonderful," he told the New York Post in 2008. The grandchildren can now say Grandpa was found. But though he is happy that his father's remains have finally been located, Stephen is still haunted by the thought of Georgie's final moments. "How does something like this happen?" he asked in an interview with Newsday. "How do you dispose of someone and bury them in the basement and pour concrete over them, and nobody knows about it?" Even though there are so many questions yet to be answered, the Carrolls can now start to think about finally putting their father to rest. They hope to bury him in Calverton National Cemetery on Long Island, accompanied by a military service. "I want him to be a soldier," Mike told Walk. "I want him to get what he needs,